Well, hello and welcome to the Creating Connections podcast, where I bring voices and perspectives from people who are making a difference for children's learning and development. I'm Rachel Stewart, and I'm passionate about connecting with people to share experiences and learn from each other how we can best support children to thrive. In this series of the podcast, we are exploring successful leaders in education, so you can learn from a diverse range of people what makes a successful leader and how you can take their learnings and apply them to your leadership. Today, I'm introducing you to an education consultant and author, Grant Lewis, who works with educators to develop their professional learning culture, literacy and pedagogical practice, as well as curriculum design skills. He also focuses on school culture and the development of relational leaders. In this episode, we're going to explore his work in leadership and wellbeing in education and what it means to create a culture of relational leadership. So I would like you to welcome Grant Lewis to the podcast today. Well, welcome to the podcast. It's lovely to have you on. And finally, we're meeting to talk about your work and in school leadership. And it's really going to be an interesting conversation, I think, because as I introduced you at the start, I talked a little bit about your work in relational leadership.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very keen to learn more about that because that's right up my alley as well. I'm very interested in exploring relationships in education and why they're quite challenging sometimes in most industries, really, but the relationships in schools are quite unique. So I'm very interested to explore that with you. So I guess we can start by going way back to where you first started, what you were doing in your career in the early days, and what sort of drove you into wanting to be a leader and what you see as your, I suppose, greatest achievement so far as a leader. So perhaps if you start by taking us way back to when you first started.
Yeah, I think I'm hoping I can live up to the expectations of providing an interesting podcast for us here. But I think when it comes down to it, it's a long time ago that I decided that I wanted to get into education. I won't go into the nitty-gritty of the details, but it all started back in grade one. There was something that happened whilst I was in grade one as a student, and I was like, I've got to become a teacher. And it was more around how I perceived other children being treated, and I was like, no, someone's got to do better than that. So no, since then I've just decided that's it. I have to be a teacher because students or children deserve the best. So that was always my mission, to become a teacher so I could give them the best of me.
Was that a sense of social justice at an early age?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I've always believed that whatever we do, it's our job to raise other people up. I think perhaps that was my upbringing. I'm not sure, but it's just always been a part of what I believe I'm supposed to do. So, yeah, I suppose my leadership journey started way back then, even though it was kind of dormant and background. But I got into teaching degree, went overseas and taught in London for a little while, then moved up to Edinburgh and taught there. And I think Edinburgh was the first school I actually got a taste of my first leadership role, which was in IT, which isn't anything that I'm super passionate about these days, but it was an opportunity. It was a very small school. It was a rural setting. There was only 72 children, so someone had to lead it, and I was the only one under a certain age, so therefore I had to be tech savvy. Then, so I moved back to Australia, down to Melbourne, and I think I just fell in the right schools at the right time. So I started at St. Vincent's in Strathmore, and they had a part of they were a pilot school for the Lattice program, which no one will have any reference point to unless they were a part of it. But in essence, it was all about technology teaching and education. But it was called technology, but it was really about pedagogy. So the school signed up thinking it was going to be about IT, but it was really about inquiry-based learning, and Lane Clark was the person that kind of drove that program. Then I moved to St. Christopher's in Airport West. And yeah, that's when I kind of got a little bit more of a taste for leadership, where I was given I think I was in my fourth year of teaching, and I was asked to lead the review and validation process. And I'm not sure if that was an exercise in cruelty by my principal at the time.
Yes, I've heard about that journey through the review process.
It's delightful and everyone loves it. But I think it was a really good opportunity for me in a very early career stage to have such a big, broad view of what is required in schools, and um, having an understanding of the behind the scenes. Then I think I was a maths leader for a couple of years there. Then moved schools to become a deputy principal and learning and teaching coordinator. And then through that process of being at that school, I was there for about 11 years in that capacity. Um, and then kind of went out on my own with the belief that um, I've got something to offer, and with the belief that perhaps, yeah, I don't need to offer it just to one set of teachers. Perhaps my message is worth being heard by more people. It sounds a little bit arrogant, not really arrogant, but that was my wife kept telling me, well, you've got something worth sharing, so you've got to share it with a bigger audience. So yeah, I went out on my own in 2018, and then I still kept doing CRT work because I wanted to stay in schools, and plus I want to keep earning money, because when you go out on your own, when you start off,
Yeah, it's
yeah,
kind of scary.
it is absolutely frightening. So yeah, I started doing that. Then 2019, I actually went back to a school because there was just a position that was just too good to refuse. It was just a pure curriculum role, obviously with leadership, but it was just a pure curriculum role. I was like, that's amazing. So I kept doing some consulting on the side in consultation with the principal at the time. And then yeah, it just had that balance for a few years. And then when COVID came, I was doing supporting schools, etc. Then um, we decided, like a half of Melbourne and half of Sydney, to call Queensland home. So we moved up to Sunshine Coast, and I've been able to maintain relationships with some of the schools I had, and grow to take on some more. So it's been, I think, COVID. No, I'm gonna canvas that slightly differently. There was many different things that arose out of COVID, many different things that we learned and became possible. And I think the possibility of me working remotely to support schools on an ongoing basis, or in a hybrid setting, was one of those things that occurred, and it's allowed me to I don't know, do what I do now. And yeah, it's different. It's different for me, but it's working so far.
That sounds, yeah, like a very diverse career, and not just working in Australia, but overseas as well. And you're probably one of a growing number of leaders who are taking the leap to go out into consulting, and which we do need a lot of leaders who have experience like yourself going into schools. And obviously, your wife saw something unique in you that needed to get out there. So, what would you say is the message that you're trying to get out there, and what makes you different to those other consultants who are out there moving through schools at the moment?
Yeah, I'll address the second part of that first. I have no idea what makes me different, because I don't know what they all offer, but I can only talk about what I do and how that marries up against anyone else. That's probably how it marries up. But I think what I like to, and I think most leaders like to do it, I just like to challenge the way things are done. And I like to look at the why of things and the how of things. And I think, like any good leader or any good consultant, I think the bottom line is students, and their progress and development. So regardless of anything else, I think what what I advocate for is I bring student voice when student voice can't be present. Uh, but in essence, what do I offer? I don't know. I love to just muck around and play with curriculum, pull it apart, turn it inside out, upside down, and then say, well, the Australian curriculum says we've got to cover this. You're in grade three, you've got to cover this. Let's play with the how, because the what's predetermined to a degree. But
And encouraging creativity when
yeah,
unpacking the curriculum.
yeah, I think there's different ways to map it. There's different ways to explore it, and I think if you view curriculum as a starting point rather than as your destination, I think that's another different way you can look at it. But I'd just like to map it out and explore different ways of liberating existing structures that exist in schools that we kind of just wake up and go through. So yeah, I do like to get a little bit playful with those things.
Would you say you're a disruptor of
Oh,
sorts?
you know, someone actually did once say, "Oh, yeah, you're disruptive education." I don't know, only because I'm a bit of a word nerd, and when I look at the etymology of disrupting, it's not kind of doesn't
Sounds like
ring.
a harsh word, doesn't it?
It does. The connotation that comes with it. It's a bit like critique. I suppose critique is both positive and negative, but we tend to think of the negative. So when it comes to disrupting, I don't know. Challenging, advocating, wanting for better for everyone is probably what I want. If that makes me disruptive, then so be
Encouraging thinking outside the box.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it sounds like a fun type, the fun side of your work in terms of being able to, yeah, unpack the curriculum and see how you can, where you can take it. And I recall when I was teaching TAFE students, really enjoying that part of the work and working out, okay, how can I make this really interesting for the students and engaging and really explore all the different ways they learn and how we can bring each of the subject matters into the sessions and make it interesting, make it inspiring, and it sounds like that's the part that you love. And how receptive are teachers to learning how to do that and how to map out the curriculum, and how can you explain the process that you go through to support them in mapping out the curriculum
Yeah. So in I think
without giving too many of your secrets away?
yeah. You can read it in my book. That's the easy.
Yes, we'll get onto the book
Yeah.
soon.
No, I think what I what I find is that every teacher, depending on their level of experience and their receptivity, you're always going to get a very different response. So the way that I canvas it is that it sets up structures and allows for teachers to be pre-planned to a point, but to have those big picture things taken care of, so they only have to worry about the smaller size things. So yeah, I think if through going through the process that I try and work with and advocate for, if I'm if I can deliver the message that this takes a lot of the heavy lifting out of the way for you later on, and it gives you a really good scope of where you're going, then to me, that's the message I try and sell. That it helps teachers. It's hard work at the time. Man, doing that, you can set yourself up to explore what else is possible. So I think a lot of the times when we we come across inquiries or we come across learning experiences, we're kind of building the plane whilst we're flying it. And my thing is I want to build the plane early and then you can just enjoy the flight, or you can actually
Yeah,
get the in-flight service and all those sorts of things rather than going on that mad panic at the same time. So yeah, when canvas like that, it's most staff are on board. You do get those certain individuals are like, I've seen this all before. We've played that game before. No worries. Awesome. Well, you're going to be one of my allies then. If you've done it before, you're going to be an expert, so I can recruit you and you'll be awesome. Um, but um, that's one way to look at that. But yeah, there's some people do get overwhelmed by it because it is a massive process. But I think by going very clearly over the steps and the procedures and the big picture of the why, um, yeah, you just go gently. And I haven't had anyone not succeed
that's
yet.
good. So you give them a structure and a process to follow, so then they can continue to implement that as they move through their career.
Yeah, in essence, so I think everyone's a composite of their previous experience, and all I've done is I think I've learned from that school and this process and gone to that PL and put it all together into something that I think kind of works. And yeah, I think what teachers do with it whilst they're in that school setting is they're able to work within that framework. And if they happen to leave that school and go to another one, then they get to go to a new school and appear to be an expert and say, "Hey, this is how I do things," and all of a sudden they're like, "Wow, that's awesome stuff." Yeah, I think if it becomes part of how teachers operate and how they think, then that's cool, whether it's my process or another. But yeah, having that ownership and understanding of curriculum and knowing that there's limitations that don't need to exist. I think if they can take that message away, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So would you like to share a little bit more about the book then? Because that's based on the curriculum mapping, isn't it? The book, your new book, and you're a fellow author of Amber Press, like myself.
Yeah, yeah, we're stablemates.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, look, it's called Curating Inquiries, Curriculum Design and Mapping for Primary Schools. Uh, but what it is I have a passion for inquiry-based learning. So a lot of the learning I've done has been from really good practitioners or experts in the field, whether it was Lane Clark or Kath Murdoch. I worked in international schools offering the primary years program. So, and that's a very conceptual and inquiry based stance that they have. So, in essence, what differs from international schools and I suppose systemic or schools in Australia is we have an accountability to a broader curriculum, whereas they tend to have a lot more scope and agency. There's less set content that they have to click through. So what I've basically done is looked at schools and say, well, you've got all this curriculum you've got to cover. And yes, it's old-fashioned thinking for some, but you can have an A and a B cycle, you can have an A cycle, but most curriculum that we have in Australia has to be reported on every 24 months. Some of it's every 12. So you just go, right, well, if it doesn't have to be reported until every 24 months, let's park that and go deeper on some things and then go deep on that next year. So what I basically do is have a conceptual framework that we build that's unique to each school. So looking at is there how many inquiries you want to do across the course of a year. I don't believe that 4 is the right answer because I just don't think that learning should be governed by terms. I think learning should be governed by however long it should be done for. That's an awkward sentence.
However
But
long a project can go for.
yeah, I mean, you can anticipate that there's going to be some inquiries that are short and sharp, and there's some you can take a really nice deep dive on. So it's mapping out a year and looking at how you can predict how long those inquiries might go for. So some schools I've worked with have gone with 6, some have gone with 7 units over the course of the year, and some have gone with 5. But for me, the sweet spot's around 6 because you can do 3 per semester and you've still got reporting accountability. So when there's 6 units that are conceptually framed, basically you're asking the school, what is it that you want your students to learn about? What are the big concepts? And they become the overarching themes, for lack of a better word, that we build units around. So if I work with a school, we've decided what our 6 are, we've defined what our 6 are, so there's just shared understanding and a shared knowledge. From there, it's a bit of a retrospect. Where have our students gone and what curriculum have we got left? And then you literally just have the curriculum standards out there. And I'm old-fashioned. I'm pen and paper and I'm chopping things out and blue tacking things around. I think when you put it onto a Google Doc, it all gets lost. So by the
And
way,
it's
I'm
all in
not,
the interpretation, isn't it?
yeah, I do
When
know how to use a computer. I'm okay with them.
you were the
Uh,
IT leader.
yeah, well, this is true. That was when before Google, but anyway. But yeah, once they've mapped out the curriculum, it's basically saying, well, what bits of curriculum are going to rub together, or what standards from there can we actually put together to make a cohesive unit of learning? So if I'm doing something around, I know I've got to do personal and social learning, and I've got to do ethics, and I've got to do history. I wonder, well, could I put ethics and history together? So it's removing those silos and going, all right, well, if I've got to do history, can I look at the ethics of it? Well, is there an opportunity for geography? Is there anything for civics that needs to come in there? Is there anything about critical and creative thinking that I need to imbue into that? So it's basically mapping out all those things. So then I know what content I've got to cover. And then it's going through a process of, well, how do I turn it from standards into a workable, usable unit for students to and teachers to engage in? So then we go through a process of deciding what the big idea is, and then looking at
Because it
the
is
micro.
quite complex, isn't it? If you look at the curriculum, and it's so complex, and trying to break it down into that integration process that you've just described, it can take a long time to do that and to get your head around it. And you need to have that big picture thinking really to be able to identify, okay, where's the geography in this, and where's the how can we integrate art with history? And I mean, there's so much art history. That's not funny, but
Yeah, I
how
think
can we
there's like a
bring
whole year
art
12
into
syllabus.
history or the other way
Mm.
around? And like just really, like you said, just picking it apart and then pulling it back together again. And that process to do that is very creative and critical thinking in itself. But for teachers who've never really been taught how to do that, especially new teachers, it would be groundbreaking, really, because it's such a complex process to actually unpack the curriculum.
Yeah, and I think sometimes teachers just need permission. Not
Mm.
that they need permission,
Give themselves
but
permission to
yeah,
break
just
outside the walls of,
have some fun. Because
yeah,
and that's why I advocate for not doing 4 units, because as soon as you've got 4 units, you're term bound slash time bound, and you've got 11 weeks in one term. And if you're doing a singular focus, no problem. There's sometimes that works and you can easily engage for 11 weeks. Sometimes you're pulling your hair out after 4 or 5, looking for an exit going, how am I going to get through these next 7 weeks of this unit? Because the kids are bored and I've run out of content. But aside from that side of things, when you're
is that where
developing,
they go swimming and watch movies?
that's when the commission notes start coming out from, watch this movie today. But let's do some more reflecting. No, I think one of the things that bothers me about that 4 unit mentality is if you're if you've got such a broad curriculum, which we do, and there's nothing wrong about that. It's not a judgment call. We have a broad curriculum. It's a statement. If you chop it up into 4 parts and to cover that each of those meaningfully and well, to me that's really quite challenging. But if you look at it over, well, I've got 2 years to cover most of this, and I've got 6 units this year and 6 next year, all of a sudden I've got 12 opportunities to divide this content over. And all it gives you the opportunity to spread it that way. So then you can go deeper in each of those rather than cobbling things together that may not fit and hoping that we cover it. And then just when we're on the report package, just moving a mouse over and ticking and hoping we don't get challenged by parents because we don't have sufficient evidence, because we did it a couple of times and I don't have 3 sources of evidence. But no one challenges if you get put at standard in ethics. But
Do you
I don't.
think it reduces the overwhelm for teachers in some ways, knowing that they have covered everything and not cramming it into to tick the box?
Yeah, and that's, as I was saying before, it's around setting teachers up for success and knowing that they can have the capacity and the scope to focus on other things. So you know what your reporting accountabilities are. You know, in term one, I'm going to be, or semester one, I'm going to be reporting against science and civics and citizenship and economics and business. Great. Then you know what you're looking for and you can know you've got to put it in. But yeah, hopefully it's designed to alleviate tension and stress. But we know that teachers have enough of that. So anything that can lighten that, then I'll advocate for it.
Yeah, definitely. So, speaking of overwhelm and the stresses that teachers are facing, how do you work with school leaders around a culture of well-being in schools and relational leadership?
Yeah, I think one of the first things that I try and do is I just try and listen and find out what the tensions are, what the story is, what that context is. Because even though I may have an approach for curriculum mapping, well, that's a whole other thing uh, to leadership or to relational leadership. So for me, I think the best thing that I can do when I go into a school is ask a lot of questions and just listen to stories. And it's not just the principal saying, this has got to change, this has got to change. So in some ways, it's like a little mini review without the documentation and the ticker box at the end. So I like to gather information and get a feel for a school and get a feel for um, as many stakeholders as I can. And then it's a matter of looking at actual evidence. So there's a school that I'm uh, visiting next week, and my role is initially it's just to go through all of their reporting data, go through all of their PAT data, and have a look at any other data they got, like the staff wellbeing data, all of that, and go through and just see what story that's telling. And I won't even meet with anyone aside from the principal on that day, I don't believe, because I've just got to get a sense of what that data is saying. And then it's a matter of having conversations with people. So um, I think if you lead with challenging questions, you all of a sudden automatically people are on the back foot. But if you're open to real dialogue and genuine conversations, then you ask people their story, what their perspectives are, then you have an opportunity to walk alongside someone. I don't think leadership is necessarily you pulling someone along with you. Like then you're just dragging and they're not really coming, they're just going out of obligation. But you want people walking the journey with you. So I think the first thing you can do for me is invest in relationships with individuals and finding out their stories are, and then designing something that's catered to what it is that they need to do. So um, there's a variety of different approaches you can take, and I think as a good leader, you need to be able to change gears from being, I don't like being dictatorial, but sometimes you have to say, no, this is how it's going to be. Sometimes you have to listen. Sometimes it's servant leadership. There's lots of different varieties, but I think once you know the context of that school and what the needs are, then you choose the approach that's going to work best for that setting, and then know that you've got to change gears when you need to change gears.
Yeah. What sort of challenges are you finding that a lot of schools are having in the last couple of years since we've come back from the pandemic? Obviously, people's mental health and well-being has been impacted, and the long-term effects of that are still yet to be felt, but we're seeing a lot of it now with high anxiety and teachers leaving the profession and those sorts of challenges that principals are dealing with every day, and an increase in student behavior challenges as well. So
Hmm.
what are you finding is mostly challenging school leaders at the moment?
Uh, yeah, look, staff wellbeing is enormous, and it's not something that I have a great deal of research and a body of wealth to talk around. So I'm going to acknowledge that and move on from it because it's huge, and I don't know how to fix that. But staff wellbeing and just yeah, that has to be the first thing that's addressed. But I think in like I look at what accountabilities there are for teachers just in the course of a normal day. And yes, there's a work program, but there's also an ILP and there's also a PSG to prepare for.
And what are
Sorry.
they?
I was going to say, sorry if I'm using acronyms that I've really, but individualized learning plans, and
Yep.
then like one-on-one meetings with parents and a learning diversity leader or a wellbeing leader around that plan and goal setting, etc. Um, then developing, like if there's a behavioral incident, there's a lot more write-up than there used to be. I just think that the administrative or the paper warfare that teachers have to go through, like you could almost spend as long documenting a day as you do engaging in the day.
Yeah.
So how to liberate that, I have no idea. But I think when we look at stressors on teachers, I, yeah, there's two things. There's the paperwork side of things, and there used to be like Friday afternoons, we just take our kids out for sport, and it was, well, maybe it was just me because I don't mind taking kids out for sport, but there was the element of fun that used to
Yeah.
exist in the profession that I don't believe is still there. Yes, there's elements of it, and there's still some people that operate that way, and it's a beautiful thing to behold. And I think the students enjoy that.
Kids
But
respond more to a
yeah,
little bit of fun than it being too serious.
yeah, and I think there's some I love analyzing data and I love playing with data. Don't so if anyone's a data person, this is not an insult, but I think we tend to focus too much on data, um, and not put a face or a name to that data. So I think when we talk about, well, you've got an effect size of 0.37, you were supposed to get an effect size of 0.4. Well, my query would be not why didn't you get there, but who's the 0.3? Who are these kids behind here that are missing out, and what is it that we could have done differently? What can we do to engage those children, or I don't know, make a climate or a classroom conducive to learning through trust and relationships rather than testing and pre-testing? Because yeah, there's a time and a place for that, but I'm not sure we've got the balance 100% right at the moment. I don't think we're as far as England with Ofsted, because that's kind of scary. But I think, yeah, you can see how we're becoming more accountable
Too
to
data driven.
yeah, I think I have no problem with being data driven if it's the right data and it's driving in the right direction. Yeah, I just wonder if people know the right data to be gathering and the right questions to be asking around it, because yeah, I think that creates a bit of unknown with teachers, and when we get unknown we get uncertainty, and then we can get anxiety, and I think it snowballs. So
And then there's the interpretation of the data as well, and
and then there's
understanding the human that sits behind that data, as you said.
yeah, so yeah, I think when it comes down to teacher well-being, that's probably the most important thing in schools, because if it's like if you're in an aeroplane, they always say if you're traveling with an infant, put your mask on first before you put it on your
Yeah.
infant. So if we're not taking care of our teachers, I'm not sure how they're going to be able to take care of our students. So you get the teacher part right, then surely it's got to have a positive flow onto the students themselves. So how we do that, I'm not sure, but there's got to be something around alleviating the the documentation side of teaching, because it's quite thorough. Let's say that.
Yeah, and I suppose that's one of the areas that is causing schools to not have enough time to build relationships in a lot of ways. And I often refer to the dual capacity framework, which is a family and community engagement framework. And one of the uh, aspects of that framework highlights the process and system conditions that prevent relationships from occurring, particularly between teachers and parents. And that's becoming even more challenging now, with both parents working and teachers working, long hours and not really having enough time to dedicate to actually engaging with parents. But also in schools, in your experience working with leaders on relational leadership, how are they making space and time for teachers to be able to build relationships with their students but also teacher to teacher relationships as well, colleagues, and relationships with leaders, because we know that education is based on human relationships.
Mm.
And the evidence that John Hattie's brought out around the teacher-student relationship and the impact on student learning. So in your experience, how do you approach those barriers to actually making space and time to have dialogue and to build relationships in schools?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's, first of all, it has to be something that's valued by the individual school. And generally that's got to be the principal slash the executive leadership team. If that's not something that they value, then it's lip service, it's tokenism, and it's never actually going to have that impact that we need. So uh, around that, I would suggest that that has to be a conversation that's had at that level around, if we want to improve teacher well-being, then we've got to look at our structures that we actually have to do something meaningful around this. So different schools I've worked in, I've seen different structures. One of them is, but there's always the minimum amount of time that teachers need to be released for from non-contact or non-face-to-face teaching time. And I don't know all the finances of how they do it, but teachers are released above and beyond what that is, as a recognition of, if we're going to invest time into you as a collaborative team to work together. And I think by providing that time and space, it allows for teams to develop more meaningful relationships within each other, because they will have someone facilitate, and then they'll have team time. And those teams are led by an individual team leader, and that team leader's role is to work with them and get them on the same page, and work cohesively and collaboratively. Um, when it, I think the issue is when you have schools that don't provide time and space properly, but talk to it. I think that's probably a bigger problem than not talking about it, because one of the big things I think that is important in leadership is the integrity and honesty and fidelity. So if if you're going to advocate for something, then you need to back it up. And there was a principle that I had once that said you can only provide two things. You can only provide time or money. That's the only two things you can throw at teachers. You can give them time to do it, or you can invest money in resources or programs. And I don't know if that's necessarily true. There's probably more things you could do. But anyway, even if you have a conversation, I suppose that's providing time. But in that spirit, I think if you've got to do something, you can't just talk about it. So when we look at this issue of teacher well-being and trying to get conversations, it's like asking our students to have agency or have a voice. Well, if teachers don't feel they have that agency and a voice, well, we can't expect them to pass on to students. So I think it comes back to a leadership team. They've got to want it, they've got to be it in order for it to be imagined elsewhere in the school.
Yes, and modeling it as well.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, being a principal in a bigger school, or in any school really, it's moving more away from what it has been. It's highly administrative. It's a real desk job, and I admire anyone who's a principal, because it's a tough gig. But and I probably admire those principals that can step out of their office and engage with students and engage with parents and engage with staff on a more regular basis, and still balance all the documentation and the meetings and the incidences that they have to deal with. It's a kaleidoscope of things that have to be done. And but if you can carve out time, there's a philosophy I work with. If you value it, you give time to it. So if those leaders are out there giving the time to it, then it shows in their actions, as you say, about being modeled, that yeah, they're genuine.
Yeah, and I suppose it depends on the size of the school too, and the resources that you have to be able to do all those other, you know, they're important tasks, but they take time. Yeah, another conversation I had with a school leader was, yeah, his absolute dedicated focus on building relationships in his school, but obviously as a larger school had more resources to be able to, get to those emails when he could, and but emphasize that the emails are important, but they're not as important as me connecting with the students and connecting with parents and my
Hmm.
staff. So yeah, I guess it is whether you value that and the impact that has on the whole school culture.
Hmm.
And hopefully most school leaders do value those relationships. But yeah, when there's so many more demands on them, it does provide a challenge to find the time and the space and the energy to be able to commit to that. So
Hmm.
even something as small as saying hello is is a start, isn't it? And
Yeah, yeah, and it doesn't
yeah,
have to be an hour-long conversation and
mm,
finding out about Uncle Gary and how he's traveling or anything like that. It's a yeah, the any interaction is better than no interaction, so long as it's a genuine one.
yeah. So you're a mentor for other leaders. I'm interested to know who your mentors were along your career, and if you have any interesting people that you follow now that inspire you and in your work. And I guess how do you stay motivated in terms of being an entrepreneur now and really exploring your strengths as a leader as well.
Yeah, I think I've never grown up having a hero or anyone that I've kind of looked up to. I always like had my posters from of the Australian cricket team up on my wall as a child, but I never
Who was your
really
favorite?
Kepler Vessels, but
Ah,
that's a
yeah.
kind of how old I am. But
Well,
yeah,
I
I have
remember him, so I must be old too.
excellent, excellent. Google him, younger listeners. Um, but yeah, I didn't really look up to anyone and say I want to be like that guy or that lady's amazing. I've got to follow. It was never who I was, and it's still not who I am. But there's people whose work I admire. I'm like, yeah, that they're doing some cool things. So I call them my educational crushes, and my wife's aware of my educational crushes because they're purely educational, and that's where it ends. But my first educational crush is Richard Gerver, uh, who is I think he's from Derbyshire in England, and he took on as a very young uh, teacher, took on a principalship of a failing school, and it was foreshadowed for closure. And he turned it around within a really short time period, just through innovation and passion. And then got it to the top of the league tables in their system over there. And he's gone on to do some incredible things as a speaker in education, but I think he's almost moved not exclusively out of education, but he's moved into the world of change and change management. So, but he's incredible and very generous with his time as well. He's yeah, he's. I've been fortunate enough. I caught him when he first came out to Australia when he only went to Sydney, so I caught a plane up to see him, and he was genuinely uh, amazed that someone would travel from one state to another state just to come and see him. So I saw
His
him at the
biggest
start.
fan.
Yeah, I was a bit of a fanboy. I did get him to sign my book. Sure, why wouldn't you? But he yeah, so I saw him really early on, and we struck up a bit of a friendship there, and I don't think I could say I could stay at his house if I went to Derbyshire, but I could certainly go out and have a meal with him. But he's always very generous with answering questions or providing support in the background. So he's someone that sort of mentored me without mentoring me, if that is a way of doing it. Sort of been a good sounding board. I suppose that's what a mentor is. And then my other educational crush is Misty O'Donoghue, who works in the literacy space. I think she's at Melbourne Uni. I think she's still no AC, no Australian National Uni. I think she does work for. Sorry, but as I said earlier, I love words. I'm a word nerd, and she just opened my mind to a whole possibility of different ways of exploring words and our beautiful language. It's complex and it's ridiculous, and I absolutely love it. So, inquiring into what I love about all of the work she does, I find really challenging and stimulating. But the work she does around spelling and how to actually get students excited about spelling or engaged in it, it's like, yeah, if she can do that sort of thing, then yeah, she's pretty awesome. So they're probably the two people that I look at and think, yeah, they're awesome. But I think what they both have in common is they have such a passion for what they do, and it comes through in everything that they talk about, they write about, or they interact with people. It's very clear and obvious that they are absolutely besotted by what they do, and to me, um, that's what I don't know if I've learned it from them or if I've had it, but um, I'm passionate about what I do, and I have no idea if it comes through or not. Um, but I think if I can sort of share my passion in the way that they do, then hopefully passion's contagious. So,
Yeah, you definitely, your passion does come through, and it's really interesting to learn about these rock stars in education. And I'm sure there's plenty of them that are so passionate about helping kids, and that's why we're here, obviously, to share this information with other teachers and leaders. And I really think that yeah, this information is so valuable because people like you who've already had a career in teaching, and your passion for literacy and curriculum, and it might sound dry to other people, but to educators that's your craft. And I've in another interview I did the other week, we were talking about the art of teaching and how it is a craft, and it is something that you need to learn over time. It can't be something you can learn straight away. Like anything, really, it takes time, and just having an understanding and an awareness that there are resources available and that there are supports out there to support teachers, particularly. It must give them a lot of hope in terms of learning the art of teaching and knowing that you don't have to be perfect at it, and you don't have to know everything immediately, that it does take time. And I think it's a really important message for parents to understand as well, that in our own careers as parents, we're still learning, and so are
yeah.
teachers, and particularly young teachers who are new to the profession, and really understanding where they fit and how it all works, and how each child learns. And so there's so many different things that are happening for teachers every day. And the more I learn about it, the more I realize, it's such a unique profession in that way, in that sense, because you have to be so diverse and flexible in learning about new ways to do things, but also learning who you are as a teacher and what you stand for and what your values are and how you present yourself and how you manage yourself. So I'm wondering how you learned to do that. Did you have any coaching yourself to learn how to, you seem like a fairly calm sort of person anyway, but to learn how to manage any sort of overwhelm or emotions that do come up when you're teaching? Or it sounds like you might use humor a little bit and fun with kids,
Try to.
because that always works.
Yeah.
But sometimes you have to get down to business and be
Mhm.
serious. But was there someone that helped you to learn how to do that, or did you just figure it out yourself?
Uh, yeah, look, there's I think I've learned what to do from some good leaders, but I've also learned what to do, what not to do. And I think
Through
they're
observation?
yeah, I think they're equally valuable because, as I said before, we're a composite of our experiences, and I think the longer you're in something, the more you're exposed to, and you see someone interacting in a certain way, or writing something, or just body language, and you just go, I'm not going to be like that. Or you see someone doing it equally, and you go, that's who I want to be more like. I'm going to file up what I want to remember in that circumstance. I'm going to respond in the way that so and so did, or I will never respond in the way that this person did. So I think there's when I was going back to when I was review and validation leader at St. Christopher's a long time ago, the principal said to me, Grant, I just need you to go out there and just tell them how it's going to be. Just crunch it. Just crunch them. Just tell them, like, okay, not my style, completely out of my comfort zone, because I'm not that kind of a guy. It's not my default setting. But got up there, delivered my staff meeting, did exactly how he told me to do it. He pulls me aside after and he goes, "What was that?" I said, "That's exactly what you told me to do. We never do that again." Okay, great. How did they come off? He gone, that was, I went too far because I didn't have a natural balance of where I need to go. I was over here and he wanted me here and I didn't know where there was. So I just went too far. So I think, yeah, early on, his name was Gary Trainer. He was a superb principal that I had, and he was able to um, sort of take me under his wing, so to speak, as an early leader, and um, show me and give me enough license to make mistakes. But it also gave me the opportunity to work out what sort of a leader was natural for me. We went on to do our masters together, and the leadership path that he took. He stayed in Catholic Ed and then went into the office, but he was the kind of leader he was, and through doing the masters, all that did was just reinforce the direction that we were independently going. So he took from it what he took, I took what I took, but um, there's yeah, I think there's no right or wrong to how you do it. It's just you do the best with what you have available at that time, and you hope that it's the right choice that you make.
And
I
stay true
mean,
to yourself and your own
yeah,
personality and what you
yeah.
can bring to the role.
I think it's knowing your true north, and being true to that. Because I think when I got up there and crushed it, which was an aberration, um, everyone would have been sitting there going, what was that? Because it was just a different version of me. And I think when you chop and change your leadership styles too much, people don't know what to expect, and that's unsettling and unnerving. So, um, like it or not, I'm pretty comfortable with the style of leadership I have. It works for some, it doesn't work for others, but you can tweak and adjust. But I think when you try and become a leader that you're not, I think that's when it's really quite troublesome for everyone involved, because yeah, I couldn't lead as a dictatorial kind of leader at all. It's not my way out of my comfort zone, and nothing that I would ever want to learn from and be with. So it's not the style that I would ever advocate for. So
Yeah.
yeah.
It sounds like you prefer the walking alongside style of leadership.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I kind of like people. Um,
You would hope so. As a leader, you
it's it's
need to be able to
it's a
like people.
prerequisite for the position, isn't it, or the profession?
Well, it's been really interesting learning more about you, Grant, and I'd really like to hear from you in how you can how people can purchase your book and contact you for any work that you would like to share. You've got a website, I know that.
I do. It's a pretty tricky one. It's grantlewis.com.au. So you can remember my name
Easy
usually.
to remember.
Yeah. Just
grantlewis.com.au.
yes, and just a note that it is about to undergo some extensive changes, because I'm not liking how it is. So don't judge me on how it looks at the moment. Um,
I
but
thought it
yeah,
looked okay.
yeah, it's pretty. I don't know.
And the book is available at
I think you can get it at online. You can get it through Amber Press or through Booktopia or um,
Amazon.
Amazon. Yeah, I think you should be, if I can work out how to add a shopping cart to my website, you probably should be able to order it through there. But yeah, it's a hold up a copy. There you go. That's it.
Curating inquiries.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. So,
Can you share what the picture is on the front?
yeah, so um, awkward. It's basically a river delta. When I was writing the book, I was asked at the stage when we came to cover design, should we go with cogs or light bulbs? I was like, no, that's not for me. That's cliched and it doesn't feel right. It's kind of a philosophy of mine. So that our job as educators is to go down a particular path or to lead students to somewhere, but then it's got to get to a like that's the river we all go on. Then they all spread out and go in their own different and unique and meaningful directions. So our job is to provide them the pathway to that delta so they can kind of spread out and go there. So that's the inspiration for the cover.
I love that. I knew there must have been a story. When I had a look at it, I thought I must ask him what that picture is, because I thought
Yeah,
it might have been a favorite place that you go to, or
no, I've never been there. I asked the publisher, I said, where is it? She said, somewhere in New Zealand. So it's somewhere in New Zealand. So
but that's a
no,
great analogy and a really great way to finish our discussion today, I think, in terms of your leadership and guiding people out into the different pathways that they're going into. And I think, I think you're very inspiring and very passionate about what you do. And I hope that this interview goes out to many people who are inspired by your leadership and what you're offering to schools in guiding them towards a number of different areas of focus, but mostly around relationships and really valuing people. So I think that that's a great way to finish today, unless you've got something else that you'd like to add before we finish.
no, just a thank you back in your direction. It's been well, I was really nervous about doing this. I don't often get nervous, so to me that was a good thing that I was. But just through thinking about what possible questions, that introspection and the thinking and reflecting was it was really cool. So and it's been great just chatting. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I've really enjoyed the experience. So thank you.
Yeah, likewise. And I'm sure we'll stay in touch and we'll probably see each
Yeah.
other at Amber Press events, no doubt. And I
Hmm.
look forward to your next book.
Oh, no pressure. Yeah, thank you.
All right. Thanks for your time today.
Pleasure. Thank
Take
you.
care. Bye.
Bye.
Well, what another inspiring interview in our Leadership in Education series of our Creating Connections podcast. If you enjoyed this interview and would like to learn more from other leaders in education, please click on the subscribe button to receive further podcasts on your feed. If you'd like to be a guest on our podcast, click on the link below to book a meeting with me to learn more about you and your leadership in education. Or if you're listening to this podcast, send an email to rachel@practicallylearning.com.au to express your interest in being on the podcast. If you are a school leader or teacher with aspirations for leadership, but you're challenged with self-doubt, overwhelm, and whether you have what it takes to take that next step, our Connect with Your Mind Mastery Coaching Program can support you to work on your own self-mastery to become the leader you aspire to be. For further information about our coaching and professional learning programs, please visit our website at practicallylearning.com.au or click on one of the links below and visit our podcast for our future series of interviews to support you as the adults who are guiding children on their learning journey. I do hope you enjoy the rest of our episodes on our Creating Connections podcast, and I hope to meet you soon.